All right, guys, pretty exciting here. We have with us the world-renowned Dr. Judith Curry. She has been a lightning rod of truth for decades, and I am excited to have her on today, and I know you guys are going to be blessed by this. Dr. Curry, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So you are infamous, we'll say, and a lot of people have strong feelings. One of the things that I was interested in was I saw that Michael Mann, his lawsuit finally wrapped up and not in his favor.
Mhm.
So I think the average viewer doesn't realize that climate science has so much um, inside politics and things going on. I'd like to go back and find out how you got here. Where did you grow up at? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in a suburb of Chicago in Illinois. And even, in grade school, I liked rocks. And I remember in fifth grade, with my birthday money, I bought a book, The Story of Geology.
Wow.
And and that I just pored over that for years, in my youth. And so I really liked that. And so when I went to university, I'm going to major in earth sciences, and then a course, Introduction to Meteorology, really caught my attention. And so then I went more in the direction of atmospheric science, and that was where I got my degrees, including my PhD from University of Chicago. And my entire career was in university. I moved around. Um, University of Wisconsin-Madison, Purdue University, Penn State University, University of Colorado Boulder, and finally Georgia Tech, um, where I was chair of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences for 13 years um, until I retired. I took early retirement in 2017, largely because I saw so much politics in the field, climate science, atmospheric science, that I just, it was, besides being boring, I thought it was not going in a good direction. And I honestly didn't know what to say to students to help them survive that environment. If they wanted a career in all this, they had to play the game. And I was very
Hmm.
against playing the game. So I said, okay, time for me to go. And since then, I've been in the private sector. I have a company called Climate Forecast Applications Network, where I help companies and government understand and manage their weather and climate related risk. And I remain active in public outreach. I have a blog, Climate Etc., judithcurry.com. I'm active on Twitter or X at CurryJA. And I recently published a book, Climate Uncertainty and Risks. So I remain active in the public debate on climate change, trying
Hmm.
to broaden the way people think about the whole issue and take a more pragmatic approach to um, dealing with our environment in a way that makes sense for humans as well as the environment.
Wow. Wow. So, so much to unpack there. Number one, we're going to have all the links to the Climate Forecast Application Network, to her X profile. So, guys, you'll be able to find her here. Uh, no problem with that. Okay. So, you as a young girl were already interested in these things. You're a child of the 60s, coming of age. What what was it like for a young woman wanting to pursue hard sciences like that?
Um, yeah, there was a lot of petty discrimination and, rude things. I mean, I was the only female in my undergraduate major at the time,
Wow.
and as a graduate student, the same thing. Um, so there was just a lot of petty, um, hostile environment kind of things, and people didn't take you seriously, but that gradually started to change into the 90s, when there was, affirmative action and people actually looking to hire female faculty members. So, um, but so I did okay in my professional career. But when people
I would say
started,
so. Yeah.
yeah, so when people started to try to bully me, to put me down in the climate debate, they says, "Oh, she's a woman, she'll cave. If we're mean enough to her, she'll start crying and cave." Well, that didn't happen. So people thought I would be easy to take down and easy to dismiss, and um, but that wasn't the case. Over the decades, I developed the hide of an armadillo. I could whatever. And, I just try to be as honest as I can and try to promote the integrity of the climate science. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do.
Wow. Yeah. You have been what I would call a truth seeker. There's certain people in life, philosophers, others, that they defy all the narratives because they shoot truth. They're seeking truth. And so people try to pigeonhole you or try to silence you. And what they find out about truth seekers are that you're not playing to the applause of man. You're playing to something else inside of you that just demands this integrity, this expose of all that you believe to be true and right. And I would say your career is an exemplar of that.
Mm, Thank you. Well, I think life is pretty boring if you dance to somebody else's drum or their tune. You've got to find your own way and your own truth. And try to develop the moral fiber to be true to yourself and
Mm,
your ideals and your principles.
wow, wow. So, all right, let's back up a little bit. Mom and dad, I guess you grew up in a kind of a traditional home.
Yeah, it was a suburb of, Chicago.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. So,
and,
what
and
did your father do for a living?
my father was college educated. He had a degree in business,
Hmm.
and there was a newspaper, Chicago Sun-Times, and he started at the bottom at a payroll clerk and rose to be vice president of finance
Wow.
before his very premature death at age 50 from cancer.
Oh my.
Uh, so that was pretty tough on the family.
Yes.
But yeah, I have three siblings, and everyone's
Mhm.
well and happy at this stage in their life. And
Now, was your
yeah,
mom a homemaker? Did she invested in
she
you and your siblings?
yeah, she was a stay-at-home mom um, until my dad died, and then she went to work.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
And now, how
so
old would you have been at that time? Did your father pass?
around 20.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you were in
Uh,
college, formative
yeah.
years. Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
the oldest one. My youngest brother was in eighth grade, so it was pretty tough.
wow.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
tough.
Yeah. So mom, yeah, had to pick up some pieces there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Now, so looking back, would you say mom was a tough cookie like you are?
Um, in a way, but she was very sensitive to the perceptions, what would the neighbors think, and
Hmm.
that kind of thing. So it wasn't a real, I think if my father had lived, he would have been supporting my independence, but my mother was more traditional and not really understanding or appreciating, striking out in
Nice. Okay. So that's
unconventional
go,
directions.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, in like striking out, and she was supportive but didn't quite understand it.
Right. Yeah, so that's what exactly what was in my mind because you were definitely following a path that was unique. And I imagine your father was probably going, okay, I can appreciate the things that are in my daughter, but mom might have been a little more difficult to understand the path you were following. Yeah,
I think that's probably true.
yeah. Wow. So how about your siblings? I mean, they got a pretty famous sister here.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of my brothers, I mean, they're all proud of me and interested in what I'm doing, but one of my brothers gets it and he understands and follows what I write very closely. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have six children, and one of the things my wife and I try to do is observe who they are, deeply who they are, so that we're not impeding the path that they kind of go down in life. I find it interesting that God, I would say, and people in the Christian community, on based on the doctrine of Imago Dei, that we're made in the image of God, that God has created us with unique capacities, abilities, and even callings in life. So, based on your um, believing at a young age that you were going to be a geologist or the things that are interesting you, have you ever really felt that this was like destiny for you? Looking back now, did it feel like a calling and destiny where you ended up in life?
No, it's just, what I really wanted.
Hmm.
You know, I didn't think in terms of destiny. It's just, what I really wanted. This, this
So,
is what I want. And I pushed hard for it and worked hard for it. Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. So, as you begin to launch out into the out of college, uh, how how did how did you go from being an undergrad to going, no, this is going to be bigger. I've got more I want to accomplish. What did that early path look like?
Well, early graduate school, like my first year of graduate school when my father died. Okay. So, yeah, so I was at the University of Chicago, and that was tough. And they, I was lucky to have an advisor who supported me, where a lot of the other faculty members sort of didn't think I belonged there, and sort of one of them even told me as much. But I managed to push through and got my PhD, and then my career actually went fairly smoothly after that. Um, I have to say, in terms of I was always able to get good jobs and good positions and work my way up, the academic ladder. So that wasn't really a problem. So yeah, until I started speaking, my academic career was very smooth until I started speaking out publicly against the behavior that I saw in some of the climate scientists.
Hmm.
And that's
So
when it was out
when
for me.
when you were a student, did you feel like the people around you were ethical and were really like truth seekers and trying to do good
I think
science?
everyone was working hard, and there was no politics in science, at least
Hmm.
not back in that day. Everyone was just trying hard to understand some really difficult
Hmm.
courses, subjects, and pass all the exams, and it was very rigorous. There's no politics.
Hmm. So, two people come to mind when you're saying that are probably contemporary to that time. One is Dr. David Berlinski, a mathematician. Um, a gentleman named Ben Stein made a movie about 20 years ago called Expelled. And he was talking about how the hard sciences became captured by well, I guess the grant process and governmental funding. So looking back, did you, as you went into your professional career out of the academic world as a student, when did you begin to notice that things were maybe being controlled?
Um, I'm going to say around, certainly in the around 2005, that era.
Hmm.
I started to see the politics and the certain games you had to play and who was getting recognition. And, I became more aware of the politics,
Hmm.
in that during that period. I was oblivious prior to that. And then as time went on, it just got worse and worse because the whole field of climate science had become so politicized. It just became worse and worse. And I saw the writing on the wall around 2013, and I started plotting my exit and waiting for, my premature retirement from university. And I
Hmm.
finally left in 2017.
So I've got to ask then, back in '05, when you began to see this, what made you, um, I want to choose my words carefully here. I don't, what made you decide to be outside the norm?
Okay, I was concerned during that period about uncertainty and overconfidence
Hmm.
in the UN climate assessment reports. It seemed like that this story was too pat and they were way overconfident in their conclusions. They were ignoring a lot of natural climate variability, and they were just not paying sufficient attention to uncertainty. And I tried to bring this up in some of these national level panels that I served on at the time. They said, oh, yeah, let's have a workshop on uncertainty. And it was all about communicating uncertainty, which language to use, not to really acknowledge it and to understand it, but
Ah, okay.
it was about communicating. Well, this is very likely. And it was a way of what they were talking about. It was like more propaganda tools,
Yeah,
you know,
controlling the narrative, controlling
rather
the
than,
uncertainty instead of investigating the uncertainty.
yeah. So I was bothered by that. And then the watershed moment was really November 2009. I don't know if you heard of the Climate Gate emails, the whole Climate Gate.
Yes, yes.
Right. And I started speaking out at that time. I was very concerned when I saw, they were um, tr trying to keep data out of the hands of people that might criticize them. They were trying to
Hmm.
get papers rejected. They were trying to rig the peer review process. They were trying to get journal editors fired and all sorts of skullduggery. And I was absolutely appalled. And
No,
I felt
no,
I,
wait a minute. Let me interrupt a minute. So were you just an observer of this, or
I was
were
an
you being
observer.
drugged through it?
No, I was an observer. I was
Okay,
outside.
okay.
I was an outsider, but I was the chairman of a academic department. What kind, students and faculty members, I couldn't sit there and stay silent and have people think that this was okay. So I
Thank
spoke,
God.
and I raised the issues of, well, we need to make our data and our methods publicly available. We need to be honest about uncertainty and not convey our conclusions with overconfidence.
Hmm,
Uh, we need to be respectful of people who disagree with us, in a serious way,
hmm.
and try to, understand their points and resolve our differences rather than trying to cancel them. And finally, we needed to stop playing politics with our science.
What an
Okay.
idea. The scientific method.
Yeah, I know. And I thought that would be, motherhood apple pie. And I was
Right.
and I was greeted with silence, and people thought that I was the enemy because I dared to criticize, the UN assessment process,
Hmm.
the self-important scientists who were playing power politics with climate science.
Wow.
You know, they viewed me as, enemy number one. And so, and they started, yeah. So there
So
was backlash, but
how do they do that when you have so much peer-reviewed evidence of good science? I, like that, it's the incongruity of being able to slander you when all the evidence is that you're a good scientist. Like the forces
They,
behind that seem so nefarious.
well, they tried to find evidence that I was in the pay of big oil,
Mm,
that I, okay, and that I somehow lost my mind. But even put, like really, was I going through menopause and I'd lost my
oh
mind or something?
my.
It was really bad. It was pretty bad. So in 2013, Michael Mann finally figured out how to neutralize me. Just call me a denier, put me in the bin with all the cranks and the kooks.
Right.
Um, call me a denier. And people said, oh, sigh of relief. Now we know how we can dismiss Judith Curry. And even, reputable mainstream media outlets would refer to me. And well-known climate denier Judith Curry has this to say, it became part of my title, and it was crazy.
It
And
is.
and 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 it was so crazy. And there was this one organization that was reviewing all of the climate blogs, and
Mm,
they said, and Judith Curry, Climate Etc. blog is a climate denial blog. But unlike other climate denial blogs, she looks at both sides of the issue, analyzes the data, talks about uncertainties, is respectful to people with other perspectives. So I mean, if that isn't what science is supposed to be, but then she was, clearly identifying me as a climate denier and my blog as a climate denier blog. I mean, it just became so entrenched,
yeah.
you
Slander
know.
by association. Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, so, it became clear that, you know, Georgia Tech didn't like me being called a denier and all this kind of stuff. They wanted me gone. I mean, I was essentially unhireable at other universities because of all this garbage.
Sure.
And so I said, okay, well, I can sit around and suck up my big salary for, a while, or I can just leave and be done with all this. And that's when I went full time in the private sector, which is a much more honest place to be than,
For
than
sure,
the
but that took a lot of guts.
Um, well, if I was younger, I couldn't have done it. I looked at my financial situation. The mortgage is paid off. My daughter is through college. You know, I,
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
could- I,
Now
I
wait a minute.
could have.
All right. So did your daughter follow your footsteps?
No, no, she's a musician.
Oh, wow.
Music
Yay.
teacher. Yeah, she's a music. My granddaughter is interested in science, but it
Nice.
might be more biological than earth science. We'll see. It's still early days for her. She's a freshman in high school.
Okay. Okay. All right. Musician. I like that. So mom was doing the deep hard stuff and the next generation brings in the artistic worldview. Yeah. Beautiful. So let's back up a minute. You mentioned Michael Mann. Of course, I think the whole hockey stick, like the consensus, yeah, and you begin to say, well, wait a minute, let's look at this. Let's challenge just a little bit. We've got people questioning our methodology. I like what Jordan Peterson said. Um, how did he put this? He said the number of variables in trying to do good climate science um, creates a, um, what would I call this? A range where people's certainty becomes foolishness, right?
Mhm.
And so you were just simply saying, wait a minute, we're way too certain about what we're saying, and we're not willing to examine ourselves and examine our science. Is that the gist of it?
Yeah.
Hmm. So now let me just a couple of things. Now, remember, I'm a pastor, so I'm just going to ask some simplistic questions here then to fill some things in. When you began to look at this as a science, as a climatology, was was it looked at from a standpoint of how many data points, and I'm thinking now in terms of time frames. So how far back were y'all able to go back in the early days and begin to gather the evidence for what you were going to put forth? Like 100 years, 200 years? What was it? What was the ability
Oh,
to look at the
well,
climate?
the farther you go back in time, the less reliable the data is, and the
Mm,
coarser the time resolution is. So there's a, there's the geologic record, that's been around, and then there's instrumental data, there's ship logs, there's all sorts of uh, newspaper articles from the 17 and 1800s about extreme weather events. So there's a lot of information out there, but the farther you go back in time, the less reliable it is and the coarser the resolution is. Um, and since the 1980s, we have really good data because we have the global satellite system. So our data is pretty good since about 1980. And going back to 1940, 1950, it's pretty good, but not as good. And you just go back. Um, but yeah, the data is never, you never have enough data and it's never high enough quality. There's always problems. And you think it's like you're measuring something in a laboratory, but almost all data needs to be manipulated in some way. Like satellites, they measure voltages. Okay.
mm,
Trying to get that into a temperature or something requires a lot of manipulation. So the data uncertain,
mm.
inherently uncertain, because it's not direct measurements for the
Right.
most part.
So, yeah, so that begs some obvious questions, I think. So much of the science then has to be inferred up until you have actual empirical data that you can begin to calculate and put into your algorithm.
Mhm.
So, at what point do you say, okay, we can't really trust the inferred data. We can only work with what we have since 1980, say.
No, you have to look back as far as you can, and yeah, all the data has value. You just have to assign the appropriate uncertainty to it.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's the key. You want as much data as you can get.
Okay, yeah, so uncertainty. So that's really the word that I think that was applicable here. So from the perspective of a lot of laymen, when we hear the term, and I'm old enough to remember um, the Great Freeze we were going to face, the population bomb, like so the 60s, 70s, 80s, like there was this constant shifting of what we were supposed to be worried about in the world. So when we look at climate change, which is what we're dealing with now, it seems obvious to a layman that the climate changes. That we had ice ages, we had warming ages, we have these different things. So at what point is the uncertainty and the variables so large that you go, okay, we can't really forecast the melting of the polar caps. Like this is getting a little silly here. So I guess what I'm asking is how much of what we hear about climate change is propaganda versus how much is good science?
Um, some of both. The UN has relied too heavily on the global climate models, which simply are not fit for purpose for deciding how much of the recent warming is human versus natural, and it's not fit for purpose for understanding regional climate variability. It's not fit for purpose for making projections
Hmm.
to the future as to how the 21st century climate will play out. Um, so that's the issue. There's a whole lot that we don't know. You can't just look at the data of the 20th century, for example, the temperature data, and decide how much was human caused versus how much was natural caused. You can't just look at the data. You have to pose hypotheses, theories, test it, simple models, and a lot of things you have to do to make any inference at all about what has caused the recent warming. And that I still regard that as pretty uncertain. Yeah, part human cause, yeah, part natural cause. I mean, the insistence that it's 100% human cause, I think, is absolutely wrong.
So just let's back up just a second on what you said. So give us a real um, timeline of temperature change in the 20th century. What does the science really say?
Well, the science says it's warmed. Okay. Yeah, and the observations say it's warm. Humans have added carbon dioxide to the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere contributes to warming. But the most consequential issues, like how much of the warming is human versus natural, is uncertain, and there's disagreement. How much warming to expect in the 21st century, that's uncertain. There's a lot of disagreement on that. Is warming dangerous? A lot of disagreement on that one. And will human well-being overall be improved if we rapidly get rid of fossil fuels? Huge amount of disagreement on that one.
Sure.
So the most consequential issues is a great deal of uncertainty, and a great deal of disagreement. And that we're just dealing with an exceedingly complex problem. Not just the natural system, but how the natural system interacts with human systems.
Hmm. Yeah. So, but just listening to you right now would say to me that the legislative, regulatory machine that government uses, and the finances that they dedicate to climate change does not at all seem to align with what you were just saying. So it seems like there's some um, other reasons other than climate change that are driving this kind of control mechanism, the finances, the regulation. Does that have anything to do with what you ran into early on when you began to see this kind of disparity between the science and the propaganda, or I would even say the politics of it?
Yeah, in the 1980s, um, a lot of the globalist movement, the UN environmental program, I mean, they had a big priority to get rid of fossil fuels.
Right.
And they saw climate change as a vehicle,
Mm,
to develop an agenda around that. I mean, this was put into play, really in the 1980s in a serious way. I mean, we had a UN treaty, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to avoid dangerous anthropogenic cause warming. And this was put into play before there was evidence of much warming or before we had much understanding at all.
wow.
Okay. So this
Wow.
was put into place. So you had the policy cart leading the scientific horse for the last 3, even 4 decades.
Wait a
Um,
minute. You're uh okay. So you're confirming so much of what I think the average person feels is happening with that statement. Like it really feels like that there's this agenda and that the science is expected to line up with the agenda versus the agenda being designed around what science can actually prove.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what's happened. I mean, yes, there is warming, and depending on your values or where you're located, warming's bad or good or indifferent.
Right.
Um, and, and the sad thing is it's this whole climate change issue is displaced traditional environmental priorities.
Hmm.
Oh, it's okay to kill the raptors with wind turbines and disrupt the whale population off the Atlantic coast. I mean, that's okay because climate change,
Right, right, right.
and all of these things and all of the traditional environmental values of clean air, clean water, protecting species habitats have all been relatively ignored in the rush to eliminate CO2 emissions,
Okay,
which,
perfect, perfect. Wait, so because I want, we're going to come back to that in a minute, 100%. But real quick, and I want to get to the environmentalism, what I would call environmentalism. So obviously, big climate change, um, ice ages, the major warming can clearly impact human habitation. Do we really know what has caused the previous what we call it seismic climate change? Do we have any evidence of what caused an ice age, or do we
oh yeah,
what caused the warming?
okay, yeah, yeah. The ice ages started way back when the continents sort of moved into place so that we had a relatively closed Arctic Ocean. And that allowed, we needed that geographic configuration. And then the ice ages come and go. And this relates to like basically orbit, the tilt of the axis of the Earth and how it wobbles and the ellipticity of the orbit and things like that. And this happens over, you know, 100,000 year kind of time scales. So we have a general understanding, okay, of that process. But there's a lot of, okay, within the last interglacial, I mean, the current interglacial that we're in, since about 11,000 years ago, there have been some wild fluctuations in
Mm,
global, huge fluctuations. And then 8,000 to 6,000 years ago, we were in a warmer period called the Mid-Holocene Optimum. This was a warm period. And then we started cooling, which culminated in the Little Ice Age from about 1300 to 1850.
mm-hmm.
And then now we're in a warming period that started around 1850, and that people, they show this spike, okay, of, recent warming,
Mm-hmm.
that been in the last few decades. But the point is the resolution, the temporal resolution of what was going on, say in 7,000 years ago, that was maybe 300 to 500 years. So a 20-year spike, would just be averaged out in the noise. So
Yeah, it's a
thinking,
blip. Yeah.
yeah, so what we're seeing right now is a blip, um, that humans have contributed to, but
Mm-hmm.
thinking is some unprecedented thing, I mean, it's just not correct. There have been times when the atmospheric CO2 concentration has been almost an order of magnitude higher, you know, very
Mm.
long time ago. But that this is nothing that the planet hasn't seen before. So it's this whole narrative has been spun up, around fossil fueled warming, because some people want to promote a globalist agenda and don't like fossil fuels.
So when I was a child in grade school, we were being warned of a giant global cooling time, an ice age, a mini ice age to come. D- you would have been in high school, college at that time. What did looking back, what was the science driving that?
Okay, there was a big warming from about, say, 1905 to 1945. We had significant warming, and then the temperature started to decrease, and then they decreased until about the late 1970s. So people saw this decrease, and they thought, well, are we headed towards an ice age? We are actually in interglacial. We've been in the interglacial for about 11,000 years ago. And some previous interglacials only lasted 10,000 years. So, we're headed for another ice age. One might even say we're overdue.
Hmm.
Um, over the next 3,000 years, one would sort of expect another ice age, unless the humans manage to artificially keep the planet warm enough by burning fossil fuels. So that's another way of
So we might
looking at
be actually protecting ourselves here, or saving ourselves.
yeah. I mean, I view it an ice age to be a much more harmful to humans than the slow creep of warming that we're seeing from fossil fuel emissions.
Yeah, because even from a layman's view, obviously the warming trend has greened the earth in a way that it's never been green, at least in human history. Our food production is significantly increased. Like we're seeing a lot of things that I would call benefits from the warming. That
Well,
go ahead. I'm
since
sorry.
since 1980, we have satellite observations of the vegetation, and we have seen a trend of greening of the planet. And this is, I mean, not just warming, but also the additional carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I mean,
Mm,
if you have a greenhouse, you're pumping carbon dioxide into the greenhouse to promote plant growth. So plants like CO2. So that's one of the benefits of
yes.
what's going on is the forests and agriculture. It's very favorable to plants.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things, this is just a musings of a silly man. That I was thinking the other day that the trees breathe what we expel and we breathe what they expel. And what a beautiful symmetry is found in that. Anyway, that's
Yeah,
just some musings.
yeah, very synergistic.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very neat. So, all right, let's get back to a minute. All right, environmentalism. So, from a Christian standpoint, from a conservative Christian standpoint, not politically conservative, meaning theologically conservative, we believe that we have a creator and that he has charged us as his highest form of creation with the care of the earth. And so Christians historically, everything from the SPCA to YMCA to about every benevolent organization in Western society comes from some kind of a Christian group. And so the early environmental movement was a Christian base. So talk to me and our viewers here about what does good environmentalism look like? What does it look like to be a good steward of our environment and of the climate?
Well, we want to minimize real pollution, air, water, soil pollution. Um, we want to be good stewards of our water resources so that they're available for use by humans and by ecosystems.
Hmm.
And, and for with your North Carolina basis, I mean, too much water is not a good thing, as you've recently experienced. And so trying to, there's nothing wrong with, I mean, engineering the environment in a responsible way is a good thing. Um, it's been argued that the Tennessee Valley Authority sort of dropped the ball on building structures that would have managed the floods a lot better than what we saw with Hurricane Helene.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's really about trying to minimize our impact on the planet where we can. But we're a planet of 8 billion people. Okay, let's face it, we're going to have an impact, but we want to manage it in a sensible way. So we have all the ecosystem services that we need so that um, plants and animals have some favorable habitats, but humans also have the resources to thrive and to flourish. So it's there's a lot of things, and some of those things kind of work against each other a little bit, but you strike a compromise and, different cultures and different regions will balance all that in different ways. So, I mean, it's we muddle along, but these are common human values that we should keep in mind. But having the getting rid of fossil fuels and minimizing CO2 emissions as our primary value, okay, sends us in wrong directions, both for human flourishing and even for ecosystem thriving.
Thank
So,
God for you saying the truth.
yeah, so it sent us in a wrong direction, actually.
So just if we were to take a fraction of the money spent on climate change, CO2 emissions, and clean some of the rivers in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, or up in Wisconsin, or Minneapolis, or so the reality is that, according to what you just said, so much of government resource and UN resources are being misallocated from making the earth a more inhabitable and profitable place for both human habitation and other creatures. It's being misallocated on really what seems to be, from my standpoint, a control mechanism that has nothing to do with the climate. Is, does that
Well,
sound
yeah,
reasonable?
yeah, even if we were successful at reaching net zero by 2050, we wouldn't notice any difference in the extreme weather or the trajectory of sea level rise by the end of the 21st century. So it's not a fix for the climate in any way.
That's pretty
Um,
maddening to hear a scientist like you saying that.
well, yeah, and it's there if you dig deep enough in the UN assessment reports, but it's certainly not what makes the headlines. Um, so there's that. And over even if it weren't for the climate change issue, there would probably be a 21st century energy transition, looking for more abundant, cleaner, cheaper
Yes.
uh, sources of fuel. And you would expect that to happen. Um, and the advanced, the generation four nuclear power plants and advanced geothermal, they look exciting. And there will probably be other advances over the course of the 21st century. Will we still be burning oil by 2100? Maybe not. We may decide that oil is so valuable for other purposes that we have better sources of energy that we don't need to burn it anymore. Well, I
Right.
mean, let's see how it plays out. But mandating this urgent transition away from fossil fuels, and the only thing that we can implement quick enough is wind and solar power, is really setting us back because there's no way that wind and solar power well, they take a toll on the environment because of the large land use that they need and all the mineral resources and everything like that.
Right.
But they have a huge land footprint. I mean,
Mm.
huge,
Yeah.
and not a good thing for, habitats. And
Mm.
humans have other things they want to do with the land, not to mention that it hampers the ecosystems and the animal populations. So
Yes.
um, it was just it set us backwards by thinking that we can run industrial economies off of wind and solar power. It has really set us backwards.
Well, we have, look, I think Germany, we have a micro model to look at. And Germany, since Angela Merkel came into power 14 years ago, they have collapsed their economy and their energy sector. They're buying all their power. As much as we talk about Ukraine and Russia, all of Europe is buying its oil and gas from Russia, keeping their economy afloat. So they collapse their own energy sector and they're needing to buy it from everybody else. And I think we have a good little model to look at there of how wind and solar has failed, and that and I live in rural eastern North Carolina, intercoastal North Carolina, and farm fields all around us are covered in windmills, and solar panels now. So I think the German model says to us that you're absolutely correct. This is not going to work in a long-term solution.
Exactly, exactly. So I think, I mean, Europe has been pushing this the hardest. And I think even they're starting to realize that this just isn't going to work. Um, the US, again, has been fairly seismic with Trump's election and backing out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So, and of course, China and India were going along just to go along, but they weren't really seriously.
Right.
But they are moving forward. Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for India to have solar power, and China's moving ahead very quickly with nuclear power. At the same time, they're building a lot of coal plants. So
Yes,
that they recognize that the world needs a whole lot more energy, not just to electrify Africa, but and other countries who don't have access to grid electricity, but all the um, artificial intelligence and blockchains and data centers and quantum computing and all this robotics and all these new advances that we want to move us forward in the 21st century require a lot of electricity.
yes.
So we just have to really scale up in terms of how much we're producing.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I think in terms of on a very simple level, the vehicle I get into with the devices I have in my pocket, the amount of energy that they use and the amount of computing power that they produce is only going to exponentially grow. It's not going to shrink anytime soon.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Wow. All right. So, man, you have been such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much. A couple of questions here. If you could wave a wand and redirect all the money that I think the number I heard was 90 billion or no, that was one per, I think it was $4 trillion that the Biden administration allocated for climate change over the 4 years. If you could wave a wand and get President Trump to redirect that money into into the climate or into the environment, what advice would you give? Because President Trump's listening, I'm sure he is. what advice would you give the president on what to do moving forward?
Well, first, energy research and development. Um, Figure out how we can have more abundant energy that's cheaper and cleaner.
Yes,
Figure that one out, and that is really central. Then we need to reduce traditional pollution, clean up the rivers and all that. Okay, and then we need to reduce our vulnerability to extreme weather events, like what happened with Hurricane Helene.
yes,
Is better management of our water resources, so we're not stuck with too much or too little. We've got the appropriate dams and reservoirs and all that. Okay, and we have the appropriate land use policies. We have the appropriate building codes and emergency management protocols and better warnings and this, that, and the other. And let's try to reduce our vulnerability to these extreme weather events because I mean, they disrupt communities for maybe up to, for several years, even up to a decade.
decade,
And
yeah.
that's in the US, let alone when it happens in less developed countries. They're
Mm.
relentlessly impoverishing when they occur in underdeveloped countries. So those are the three priorities that I would do. Energy R&D, clean up the real pollution, and work to reduce our vulnerability to extreme weather events.
President Trump, are you listening? So, just real quick on the that last point, do you feel like we are scientifically and in our engineering capacities, do you feel like that we can mitigate some of that destruction that we saw?
Sure. I mean, it's a matter of, if it becomes a priority,
Hmm.
um, and resources are put to it. I mean, all the effort that's been spent on building resources spent on building, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure there are, yeah.
So you are, you're quite the comedian. Of course, it's such a serious subject. We hate to laugh sometimes, but your ability to point out some of the obvious fallacies that we deal with in society is uncanny. All right, last question here. 15-year-old Judith Curry. There's a bunch of them out there right now, young people, Gen Z. They have been marginalized. They deal with suicide. They deal with gender confusion. They deal with the abundance of information coming from so many social media apps. Speak to 15-year-old Judith because she has no idea that she's going to be famous, a famous climatologist. She has no idea that her research is going to change the world. She has no idea what's in store for her life. What advice would you give to 15-year-old Judith Curry out there?
Well, again, very different. The world is very different than when I was 15 years ago. But my first piece of advice is to get off your cell phones, okay, and experience real life. Okay, I think that's really, really important. And try to figure out who you are, what you like, what you love, okay, what you want to do, what you figure out, a path that is satisfying to you that can make a difference and work hard to achieve something and to at the end of the so much of our life we go through the motions, we get up, but try to find something that's important to you, something that you're passionate about, and just go for it. But in terms of dealing with the issues of the day, I think critical thinking and challenging assumptions, challenging what you hear in the news, on social media, even from your parents. Question it, try to understand it. There's so many tools on the internet now that you can really investigate all of these things, try to look at both sides of the issues, and really try to don't just don't just be a member of some tribe that's going off in some silly direction. Critically evaluate everything of importance in your life and what you're hearing, so that you aren't led astray and down unproductive paths. So it's really to think critically and to experience life. And you don't do that by looking at your cell phone all day.
Amen. I'm the father of 6 children, and I say amen. Dr. Curry, all right, wait a minute. I lied. I got one last question. This is the personal one, kind of silly, based on a biblical passage where Jesus talks, he's describing the Spirit of God interacting with people, and he describes it like the wind. And he says, we don't know where it comes from, and you don't know where it's going, but you feel its effects. Wind, what is it? How is it on the earth? And we can't see it, but we feel it. What? Describe it scientifically for me. What is wind?
Well, it's the movement of air in response to pressure differences or temperature differences. Um, that's basically what it is. And so you have a pole to equator difference in the amount of sun the Earth receives, and this drives the circulation patterns indirectly. And the fact that the Earth is rotating adds puts a monkey wrench into the system, so you get all these complicated circulation patterns. And
Can,
the scale,
can we
yeah,
predict it or control it?
we can't control it. We can predict the large scale winds um, on time scales of a week or two. I mean, that's what weather prediction models do.
But we can't control it.
No.
No. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you so much. Guys, you'll find links in the description here. Dr. Judith Curry. Just her works, the body of work is so. I spent a week studying and didn't even get the tip of it. She is world renowned uh, climatologist, specifically dealing with extreme weather events. Please follow her on social media, keep up with her, buy that book. Dr. Curry, give us that book again.
My new book is Climate Uncertainty and Risk.
Wow.
Yeah, check it out.
Check it out. All right. Doctor, God bless you. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone else, we'll see you next time on Straight to the Heart with Eric Earhart.